Campaign Terrain. Today we're talking again about from the ground up. We're going to make some more ground. This is a battle board I created. It's about 3 feet wide by about 4 feet long. Basic grass. You can do lots of things with that. It gives you a chance to attach little hills to it. You can attach stonework. You can attach rock outcroppings. You can attach burned out buildings. You can put rivers, all sorts of different formations on it. But this gives you a basic platform to start from. So today, that's it. I'm going to show you on a much smaller piece, and we're not doing the whole thing today. I'm going to show you on a smaller piece the steps I went through to get this surface. So that's it. Welcome to Campaign Terrain. Today, we're building the Earth. Sort of. See you in a minute. Okay, first we're going to start off with simple texturing. Your battle board's going to be really boring if it's all smooth. Flock and tufts that we'll add on at the end will add some texture to it, but it's better to not start off with a flat surface. Now, I've already done texturing in another video. I covered some of these topics, but not some others. So I'm going to go through this really quickly, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I can do another video on it later. But right now, I'm just going to show you really quickly which items I used for texturing and what the texture looks like. Then we'll jump into some of the other, preparing the surface of the board. But this is texturing. There's two kinds. You can put a texture into the surface. You can put a texture on the surface. These are things that put a texture into the surface. We're going to start with everybody's favorite. Lots of people do this one. That's the aluminum ball, the aluminum ball, tin foil, whichever. Just balled up, and then you take it and press it into the foam to make the different textures. As you can see, that is not smooth. And that is the aluminum ball texture. Next, we've got the roller. I explained in another video quickly how I did this, but you can see how I did it. It's basically just a small plastic roller with a pattern of hot glue put on it. I put this so that it would try to look like cobblestones. It does not work particularly well for that, but if I roll it a couple of times across it, like one angle and then another angle, and you have to press fairly hard, but it does make a good texture. But this is more of a stony texture than a ground texture. This is really good for stone walls, but it will work for what we're doing today, but you're probably going to want to add other things with it. This one right here, this is a piece of, I honestly don't know if this is granite or something where the pieces are put together, or a hunk of asphalt. I can't tell, but it's got lots of little faces and facets and ridges and bumps in it, and it makes a not smooth surface. When you're pressing this in, you're going to want to do it in different angles. You don't want to do it all and just keep going the same way. You'll end up with too much of a pattern in it. But that makes a really good stone texture. It puts the stone texture of the stone itself into a relief on the surface of the foam, and it looks like stone itself. This right here is a pet toy. They also have dryer balls that have a similar texture. As you can see, there's just dozens and dozens of little spikes on it. And I just roll it back and forth and roll it back and forth, and I get this sort of pock-marked texture. This is really good for blasted alien landscapes, things that used to be sedimentary rock and that things have come off of the surface of. But that gives you this nice, bumpy, pimply sort of thing. It can be turned into lots of chaos surfaces, things like that. I like this surface. I don't typically use it for the battle board, but I do like this surface a lot. And that's done with just a regular old pet ball. Next, we've got the brushes. Now, these came in a 3-pack. These were at the Dollar Tree, and they were $1 for all 3. So these are really inexpensive. This plastic brush doesn't do squat for foam. I even tried taking off the surface texture with my knife first, and then pressing this in onto the softer foam. This does nothing, so I don't even use the plastic one. The brass is the bottom, and the steel is the top. They give very similar textures, but slightly different. I don't have any idea how to describe the difference. All I know is that they're different, and you can use either one you want, and those are good ways to surface texture battle boards, stone walls, castle floors, etc. Next, we've got chemical inducement. We've got acetone, which I am dripping, and that will take the paint off of my board. So let me get that really quick. Okay, okay, don't use that. But the spray, you can use the spray bottle like that, or you can put some in a bowl. There's not any in here, but you can put some in a bowl and use a brush you're not worried about losing, and you can brush it onto the surface. This is the sprayed on surface where I put the spray on and just let it soak in. Let me try to get that with less glare on it. Nope, that's not gonna work. There we go. So that's it with the spray on it, where I just let it soak into the surface. This was brushed on at 100% concentration straight out of the bowl, and that can leave nice big gouges. You can make pools in it if you want to put like, if you want to create a pond in the middle of your battle board or a river, you could use that to cut into the surface, and then you could paint that the color you wanted and fill it with some type of resin or something to make water. So that's really good for that. So you've got the spray on acetone and you've got the paint on acetone. And last, this is a blowtorch. Pretty simple. Works like that. That's on. I don't know if you can see the flame on the, but that's on. And you just take it and a few inches back, move it in and out, make some pattern, make some waves on it. You want to try to avoid patterning it, so you want to do it pretty randomly. If you get it too close, you will burn it very quickly. If you do it too far away, it won't work. I tend to hold it with something stuck into the back. You can see where I had one of those bristle brushes used as a handle, so that I don't burn my hand. And then I can spray. I can move this in and out as I need. Here's the texture that. Here's the texture that the flame gives. You can see that it's got sort of a dished and dome texture to it. And so that's it. That's all I've got for surfacing, for texture surface, for impressed surface texturing into the foam. So just a second after the jump, I'll be back and I'll show you some surfaces some texturing you put on the surface rather than into the surface. Okay, so wait up and I'll be right back with you. A bit of a note before we jump into the surface text to the paint on textures. Whenever you're doing anything that creates a lot of dust or any kind of fume, you're going to want to wear a respirator mask. So whenever you're using the torch or the acetone or anything like that on the to texture any foam, you're going to want to make sure to have a mask on. So always be safe. All right, I'll be right back with some paint on textures. Okay, let's talk about putting texture on the surface rather than into the surface. I have two methods for this I use on a regular basis. They are the non-sanded grout. It looks like this. It just looks like a gray powder, tan powder. It does come in different colors. My hardware store only had the one color. I don't care because I'm putting it into paint. If you were using it with like a white paint or something like that and you were trying to get a specific stone, be aware that you can get this in different colors. This is the non-sanded grout, the plain smooth stuff of the non-pre-mixed. It's just a bucket of powder. This is super cheap. This was $6, $7 for a big amount, and I've done a lot with this one. So that's this powder here, which is now everywhere. Next one is the baking soda, and that's literally just baking soda. I buy this in the huge industrial size sort of Mondo bags that are just, and then I take it and put it into smaller amounts so I can use it. This is just regular old everyday baking soda, same stuff you put in your freezer to prevent stink, etc. That has the same sort of thing. It's got a little measuring cup, usually comes in a bag, and that's just a plain powder. You can mix it in with the paint. I have heard that this will yellow over time, but if you're adding it to a paint, you're never going to see that. So I've never had any problem with it. The reason that a lot of people like this and the grout is that it's a smaller texture, so in scale it looks like sand rather than large huge granules of normal size sand that look very odd to the miniatures on the table. So that's just regular old everyday baking soda. And you can add sand to it if you can find some very fine sand, like some of the playground sands, but I typically don't do that. All right, so let me show you what we're working with here. First, I'm going to paint some with the plain, and I'm going to show you a simple technique to keep from getting a weird look under your flock. And then I've also got the grout. Here's my little G. This is the grout paint, and I've also got the soda paint. I'm going to paint all three of them on here and show you the same technique because I use it on all three, and it's very simple. So, again, I'm using my Boom, which is my dark gray paint and PVA glue. It's about a 30 to 70 mixture, 30% glue, 70% paint. I do not use black on any of this because nothing in nature is black. Dark gray I've always find works well, so I always use the Boom. I don't like having Mod Podge or another sealant type glue on the bottom. I find, just for me personally, paint doesn't stick as well to it after the fact. So this is my go-to. I call it the Boom. The reason I call it the Boom is once you add this, it all starts to come together. Everything built up to that point, 14 different colors of stuff you've added together. Once you put on the Boom, everything's gray, and you've got a nice place to start with for putting your texture and your color on. So we're going to start with this simply. This is, I'm just going to squirt some here. That's way too much. But spread it around. And I don't know if you can see it on camera. I'm going to show you in just a second. You get definite view. You can definitely see the brush marks on that. So what I do is, rather than just brush it on, I will brush to cover the entire surface, and then I will stipple it on. I don't typically use a stippling brush for this. I just use one of my brushes that's got the bristles that are all beat up, and I just stipple to get a broken up, more organic, natural, realistic looking texture. There's no brush marks in it. And once this dries, the glue in it will shrink up a little, so this actually becomes a little bit thinner on the surface, and it's really good for any sort of naturally occurring organic texture you want. Okay, now I'm going to mix the grout here. This was already mixed, but I added a little water to the top just to stop it drying out while I was getting ready to film. So this is the grout paint. Did I grab the right one? Yes, okay. This is the grout paint. You'll see as soon as I do this that there's going to be a bit of a lumpiness to it, and that is good. That is what you're wanting. Stipple that on in much the same manner as the other. Just avoid any brush strokes. Now, you don't want to mix them, so I'm going to use a different brush for the soda in just a minute. But there you go. It's got a similar looking texture now while it's wet. I'll show you some dry samples after we jump to the next scene, but for right now it's similar, but it will have a difference in texture once it's done. But it is not as pronounced as the one I'm about to add. Now, same deal. Got a little bit of water in here. Let me stir this in. This is the one with the soda. Now, it's regular old baking soda, bicarbonate of soda, whichever you call it in your neck of the woods. Don't use baking powder. I suppose that might work, but I have no idea what the outcome would be. So, this is the one with the soda. Stipple that into place as well. There's no real ratio to either of the powders to the paint. You just add them till you feel like that's going to leave a sufficiently grainy, gritty quality to it. So, oops, I have spilled my paint. Let's move that. And as you can see, they all start off fairly similar in texture. The grout has taken on a bit of the color of the grout. That may or may not affect your final outcome. I've never noticed it being a problem. The soda does not seem to affect the color at all, but you can already see a slight difference in the texture on this. So that's it. I've got plain, flat, smooth, non-textured here. Grout with no texture built in here. Soda with no texture in the foam here. So I'm going to make the jump here to the next scene. Stick around with me and I'll show you what they look like after they're all dried. Okay, I've had time for those to dry. It's been just a few seconds for you. It's been about half an hour for me. As you can see, all three of those are dried up. They have different colors to them, but that's just from that grout in the one. But I'm going to show you up close. You can see that's pretty smooth and boring on that one that's plain. That one's got a bit of texture there in the grout. You can kind of see it. There we go. And you can see there's a lot of texture in the one with the baking soda. That's why I generally prefer that. For my ground, I tend to use the grout for things like adobe and other plaster type walls. So these do not always get perfect coverage, so I usually put a second coat. There's always going to be different kind of paint. There's going to be different colors blotted over it. Use sponge techniques and that sort of thing. But this is with the plain smooth with the boom with different additives. These are all done with the boom. This is just with an older version that I didn't use as dark a paint on. So I'm going to show you here. This one is a plain, smooth surface. There's nothing to that one. This one has the texture in the surface, and then it's hit with the darker gray boom. You see that that's got a lot of texture and detail to it. The boom really brings that out the moment you hit it. Once again, compared to the smooth. And this is just the texture in the foam with the paint over it. Now, we've got this one here, which is smooth with no texture in the foam. It just has the baking soda texture painted on. As you can see, there's still a lot of good texture on that, a lot of ups and downs, little divots, but it's all smooth enough that a figurine can stand on. I'll show you that in just a second. And then this one, this is the final one. This has got a texture into it and a texture on it, and that's done with the baking soda as well. So if you look, there's like a gritty, sandy texture to it, as well as these divots and holes in it. Now let me grab a couple of my little dudes here. my little mascot from the channel there. We'll grab one of these with a big wide base. We'll grab one of these with a tiny small round base. And I think his base is even... Nope, that's the same size. Alrighty. So, as you can see, no wobble here because... Oops, I have that wrong. No wobble here because that's the smooth one. There's not going to be any divots there. This has the texture put in it. There's no problem. I can sit him anywhere. He won't fall over. Same with any of them, even the one with the smaller base. This one's got the texture put on it, so it's got a few lumps and a few ridges. As you can see, oops, that was me throwing him down. There you go. If you just sit them down normal, they're not going to fall over. And this one, that's the one with all of the texture in it and on it. The worst of it, the deepest of it, is going to be right here. And you can see that even in that area, there's no problem. Oops, that's me dropping him. But there's no problem. You can sit him anywhere. He's not going to fall over if somebody bumps the table. With the square base, the old style, there's going to be no problem there. They're going to, and especially if you're using any of the larger bases, you're going to have no problem at all. So that's the differences in the textures. Now give me just a second to get it set up, and after this jump, I will show you putting on the initial flocking, and then I'll show you what the flock looks like in the middle point, and from there, I'll knock that dried flock off and show you what a final product can look like. So join me after the jump. I'll be right back. Now we're going to put some flock onto my sample piece. I'm going to show you the different ways you can do that, the different things you can use to add on there, and it's up to you. Anything you need to get them to stick on there is fine. I happen to be going to be using my boom because I use it all the time for everything. Then I've also got the Fitty Fitty, the half water, half glue, and I usually use a tacky glue rather than PVA. That gets it a little thicker. Sometimes I thin it down a little more, so I put it in a sprayer, and that's good too. Or you can use the PVA straight out of the bottle. Does not matter. Whichever one is your preference, and it works for you. All we're trying to do is coat the entire surface of the piece, and then sprinkle the flock on it. Now this first layer that we put on is going to be the whole thing. You want to put it everywhere. You're not necessarily going for like 100% coverage because you can fill in the spaces after the fact, but basically you're trying to get a nice even coating over the entire thing. So I'm going to I'm going to first put something down so I don't get paint all over my board. Alright, and I'm going to take some of the boom here and put it on there and just start to spread it around. I'm going to coat the entire thing. Once I'm done, I'm going to hit it with my sawdust. Now, when you're doing this, nope, let me get to that stage. I'll tell you in a second. So let's get the paint on here. And there's no rhyme or reason to this. Again, you're going to want to probably stipple it like you did on the first batch. And we're just going to spread this around. Let me get this fully coated and I'll be right back. I've stippled all of that with the boom, or with my gray paint that I use. So that's all painted up and ready to go. And let me show you how we carefully and delicately put flocking on here. I literally just cover everything. I don't go particularly thick. You can create it so it'll make lumps, and if you cover it with enough of spray glue afterwards, it'll stick on there. You can make little hillocks, you can make little tufts just out of the flock itself. I typically go for one single layer on the first one, and then I do add some additional texture with my next layer after I do it. I go pretty thick and heavy. I'm going to cover all of this, and trying not to just spill it everywhere, but you can just literally coat it down. And once that's all dried on there, it'll make a nice, smooth, even coat. You can then knock all of the flock off. I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Once the flock's gone from this one, you're going to want to let this dry probably 15 hours at least. 24 hours is better, just to make sure all the glue, all the paint, whatever's dry in there. And then you can dump this off. Anything that's left over, you can put back in your flock box, whichever. What I was going to say, the part that I said earlier that I wasn't going to say until I got to the flocking part. Some people like to go with the middle color first, and we're going to end up with 3 colors, and then you go with the bright and the dark afterwards. So you start in the middle, and then you have both the bright and dark as smaller. I tend to do that. Some people, though, prefer to start with the dark and then build the lighter on top of those. It's just a matter of preference. You can try either one, and it'll come out different ways. So entirely up to you, however you want to do it. But I start with the middle one, then I put the darker and the lighter on after. Here, you can see an example of that. I've put some dark and some light on here. Right now, it's raised up, and there's a little bit extra texture to it. I put a lot of glue on here, so there is some texture to this. However, a lot of this should knock off, but it won't be all of it because, like I said, I put a lot of glue on here because I really wanted some bumps of texture. And you can knock it off like this if you want, or that freaks some people out. They're absolutely having a conniption that I just did that. But you can also just knock it off like that. You can turn it over and thump it. Now with that 4x3 sheet that I did, you're not going to be able to flip it over and do that. So I had to tip mine up on the table and dump it off and then sweep all of the stuff up after. Now, you can end up with it really patchy. You can also do you can feather it in using a lot less glue. You can add colors over other colors here. I did get that a little thick. That's all right. And you can do it however you want. You can end up making it with like swaths of it that almost end up looking like a golf course. Like that would be the green and the other part would be the rough. Why you'd want that in a fantasy game? Sometimes you want to say that the darker part or the lighter part is marshy and the other part is the normal ground that you can walk on, so you can have different abilities for your guys to walk, different rates of speed, different abilities to jump and duck for cover. However, so the color might or might not match depending on which game you're playing. But on mine, this one right here, I didn't do it for that. This is just a sample of me sticking some pieces on. Now, this is not a particularly good example. I did not apparently do a good job on my sample piece. But I'm going to come back in just a minute. I'm going to have my full battle board again. You can see that I did a much better job than this on it, and you can take a look at it in larger detail. And I will have it in a minute, no hills on it, no figures on it, just the board and me, and we'll do a little bit of a wrap-up. But basically, we're done. So, see you in just a minute for the wrap-up. If not, take a chance to look me up on social media, find any posts or anything like that. Keep in touch, and I'd love to hear from you. And I'll be right back with the full battle board. As I said with the examples, it just takes a little patience to avoid any of the clumpiness. You can do it in small little bases. You can do it on large expanses, obviously. I've done that here. As you can see, I did a lot better with this than I did with my sample for you guys. Sorry about all that. But get a battle board like this and make it in these colors if you want. You can go with alien colors. You could do the same thing with reds or purples. You could do Underdark with all those purples and greens and blacks. You can do any color you want. I just needed a grassy, basic nature, go out in the woods and have your adventures and seeing your bullets and whoever else you're fighting. And so I created the 4x3 sheet that I've got here. Now, there's nothing to it. It's just a matter of the stages. Texture in the foam, paint some texture on, paint some glue on, toss some flock on, let it dry completely, knock off any of the excess, and hit it with a clear coat to keep everything on. And that's it. Entire expanse of grass ready to play on. You can plunk your towers on, your hills on, castles, whatever you want. Ready to go. So that's it. Battle board today on campaign terrain. But it turns out really nice, and it's going to give you years of fun to play on. So I hope you've been enjoying what you've been seeing here on campaign terrain. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Thanks so much. Love you guys.